everyone. Welcome back to the podcast where we talk about everything and anything, but most likely conversations that will bring out your youthful fire, keep you connected to your youthful memories, and just keep you moving in and where you are. In today's episode, it's still I, your host, Caroline Mamani.
Your host here, Dosila Ogola. Welcome back to the podcast. Yes.
And with us today, we have an amazing, amazing guest who is joining us to make sense of this very important conversation that you'll get to know in a few. I'll allow our guest to introduce herself so that she has all the right accolades, accolades in the right place. Everything, everything.
Yes.
Please take it away.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, my name is Dikeledi Mokoeana. I am South African by birth, but an Pan-Africanist by heart.
Wow.
And I'm very happy to be on the show. Thank you very much for having me.
Wow, thank you so much, Dikeledi, for joining us. And I think having said that you're an African by heart speaks to the conversation that we're having today, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as we're talking about identity, we intend to unpack it in the quest of understanding our Africanness. And we are speaking into our Afrocentricity and the quest for identity.
Interesting subject.
Very, very heavy. Very, very heavy.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but again, we just want to understand, you know, and maybe for you, Dikeledi, you can start it off for us. Is there even something like that? Is it even important that we unpack identity from our heritage or from our Africanness, as I said it?
Yeah, of course. I mean, as people who have historically been colonized, and that colonization basically involved an eradication of a sense of being, how we did things, how we lived, our value systems, and there's so many other things, including the way in which we governed ourselves. So essentially, our everydayness, right, our daily lived experiences was affected by colonization. And unfortunately, part of that process also involved this sense of us negating who essentially we are in essence for a particular identity that would enable us to survive in a context, basically that sort of had a sense of or defined what being is, what being human is, right? And of course, that sense of being and being human was modeled in accordance to our colonizers. And unfortunately, with that whole process displaced who we are. And I think when you go back to this idea of reclaiming, right? So reclaiming an identity, we would not have a reason to reclaim an identity unless it was
Mm-hmm.
lost.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And so, in a sense, so it is quite important for us, particularly this idea of Afrocentricity and regaining our identity. What that identity is, I think we'll get into sort of hopefully have a conversation about it as we about the show.
This is quite intriguing because your choice of word, regaining.
Mm-hmm.
And here I was thinking, we are just unpacking,
Mm-hmm.
but it's speaking to that it was there and then it wasn't. And now we must bring it back intentionally. Yeah.
I think for me, what is very interesting is when I look at myself and how I choose to identify myself, and my Africanicity is something. It's so much of an afterthought, and I like what Dikeledi you said about just that disconnect that happened during colonialism times. Even the way I'm talking about it, I have such a hard time understanding that there's a big disconnect, and a lot of
You're
us are
breathing
very
heavy, actually. So it's such a weighty conversation.
it is, and I feel like, oh my god, to some extent, a lot of us don't even know how much we are disconnected from our Africanicity, and also just centering that part of ourselves. Yeah.
I mean, which then begs the question, like, where do we start this from? Because my initial understanding is that it's something that is here, is available, it's necessary for us to embrace.
Mm-hmm.
But then with the colonial or pre-colonial history and everything that preceded that, Dikeledi, where where do we even start from? I'm lost.
Yeah, I think as somebody also who's gone through, basically was born into a country that experienced apartheid,
Mm,
colonialism, a country which basically rendered African identity as inferior, a country in which, basically, in a sense, all that we are was displaced,
Mm-hmm.
right? Displaced in so many ways, or displaced and dispossession, displaced through basically, necessarily being allowed, or given space to practice, our own spirituality, right,
mm,
our own identities, etc.
mm,
And of course, the displacement happens
Mm-hmm.
systematically, right? And part of the ways systematic displacement happens with regards to identity, it would be, for instance, the privileging of certain, sort of what is beliefs, and signifiers of identity in comparison to others. I'll give an
Mm-hmm.
example. So currently, right now, the national holidays that are celebrated, that are related to religion, are Christian
Mm-hmm.
holidays,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's somewhat, basically what it does. It denies the presence of people who may be non-Christian, people who may have African spiritual, beliefs. It also, interestingly, also negates Islam, right? Because South Africa is not dominantly an
Mm-hmm.
Islamic
mm,
country. So the different forms of identities that are linked to religion, and of course, it's not just religion, but a philosophy as
Mm-hmm.
well, right? Also, culture is linked there. Because remember, all of these things, particular colonization. So what it does, it came in as not just an economic project, not just a political project, but an intersection of political, economic, and cultural, and a cultural, project,
mm,
right? So you go into a place, you have to convince these people that their way of existence is inferior, right?
mm,
And that also means their own economic mode is inferior, their own governance mode is inferior. And then you then introduce your own. Of course, the introduction was not always, seamless. It was also involved, some level of violence, right, as we know, in
yeah,
different historical contexts. So you also
yeah,
violently introduce your own mode of governance, your own mode of, economic governance, how politically you organize yourself. And then, of course,
mm,
all of that comes with certain cultures, right? All of us tend to speak about, work culture,
Mm-hmm.
institutional culture, whatever this culture. So all of these things then come with a particular way of expectation around how people should live,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, for instance, what then, so this economic, organizing that was imposed, it was what is sustained and supported by a particular religion that said, you only pray once a week. Yeah. All the
Mm-hmm.
other weeks, you
Mm-hmm.
literally have to work. So now a spiritual identity is linked to an economic practice, in a
mm,
particular economic system, right? So you can
Mm-hmm.
only pray and be spiritual, predominant on a particular day, and then all the other days you have to work. And of course, you're working for a specific mode and a
mm,
system.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, at the time, very imperial, right? Everything or the proceeds of that work actually goes somewhere
Mm-hmm.
else. So, and then of course, then the political aspect then comes in to shape how all of that economic operators,
mm,
unfolds, and that also then involves, no, man, these people who constantly, let's say, for instance, with African spirituality. So people may say, hypothetically speaking, maybe I'm an African spiritualist, and I say, oh, now my ancestors require me to, what's this, fast for this week, because my child
Mm-hmm.
is sick. So there's this particular ritual that I have to perform, and that means, getting my kettle ready, getting all of these things ready, and basically it's like a maybe 3 day affair. Okay, so in that
mm,
3 day
yeah,
affair, I mean, if under a modern colonial capitalist work mode or work structure, it does not work with that,
mm,
right? Because I cannot just
It's not
randomly have
welcome.
a
yeah,
spiritual, activity. Really, it does not. It's not. It's not, compatible with the economic, with the kind of labor and economic, sort of state that, is literally, operational in that context. So, in a sense,
mm,
spirituality, um, culture, and all of these things are components of identity, all right?
Mm-hmm.
Including
Mm-hmm.
economic behavior as well is a component of culture and identity, because
Mm-hmm.
when we speak about say, for instance, my identity is that of a modern woman. So my modernity also then says, or particularly if I subscribe to European mode or idea of modernity. So it now means my identity has to be there has to be certain signifiers or symbols that show that I am actually a modern woman, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
as a modern woman, that's my idea of beauty would involve my weave,
Your
right? Would involve
nails.
my XY,
Mm-hmm.
actually my nails and all of these and all of these things, and as much as they simply seem like they are, really like frivolous things, but they're also feeding into an economy. All right. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think and I
Yeah.
think one of the
Definitely.
things that I always say to, to my I guess whoever listens is that
Mm-hmm.
what we need to be conscious of about African identity is not just about expression. It's not just about, yes, I'm expressing and I'm wearing this kitenge, I am
Mm-hmm.
wearing this XYZ,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also about an economic commitment
I think
because
Dikeledi, just
unless China,
just to interject right there, when you're saying that the economies that inform the African identity, I was just reminded of when I planned my wedding, and it was such a conflict of even the attire, and there I am thinking, first I want to wear my kitenge. And then I'm thinking, because I'm Pan Africanist, I really needed to use this opportunity to express
Express.
that and
Yeah.
express it with a lot of confidence. And then I'm told, no, it won't give us that feel. And then I was told, come on, but we have two opportunities. You have the African wedding, and then you have the white
White
wedding,
wedding. Yeah.
So it's like, even within that, I am strongly identifying as an African woman, and I wanted to go with, fabric and a ceremony that resonates with that. But then I have to feed into two economies, because my identity is kind of,
Intertwined.
intertwined.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as you're sharing those economies and what it really, really means and how it fits, I was like, wow, totally conflicted.
I think yes,
Yeah.
unfortunately, as Africans, because experience of colonization, which informed also and shaped our cultures, right? Or what we deem culture.
Yeah.
So today,
Mm-hmm.
sort of our own indigenous identities tends to be regarded or labeled as tradition. And then I guess for instance, with just to use the perfect example of your wedding, right? Where you
Mm-hmm.
have so-called traditional African wedding and then a white wedding, which is actually a traditional European wedding, right?
Yeah.
You
That
know?
unfortunately becomes universal. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
as normal as universal that everybody has to do it. But it's actually a
Mm-hmm.
tradition, right? It's a European tradition, a Western
Yes.
so you have two traditions. And I think that speaks to this idea of a hybrid identity, right? Sort of hybridity. I think there's certain post-colonial scholars, who are attributed to that particular concept, and
Mm-hmm.
hybridity essentially, you know, is explains that particular experience that you've mentioned. That there's a colonial identity, and there's also so-called traditional identity that that is actually a part of us, and that has shaped how we then think about our own African identities. Other people, what they've done, I don't know if you've noticed certain wedding dresses,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
particularly, I know in South Africa it became like a trend where you see people who would wear kitenge type of material. We call it sushweshwe here, right? We have a kitenge dress, but
Mm-hmm.
the design would have a Victorian actually, right? A couture. So
It's
you
like
have
infused.
it's like an infusion, yes, right? So that's a
Mm-hmm.
reflection of essentially what we're talking about, that our identities have literally become an infusion of what is so-called Western and also African, which I don't think is a problem, because remember, identity is something that is fluid.
Mm-hmm.
Identity
True.
always changes. The identity is not meant to be stagnant. In
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
fact, the fluidity and the evolution of identity is supposed to help enhance our lives and make it better,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, the only problem becomes when we then assume that the evolution is towards another tradition, and then that our own tradition is actually backward or
Mm.
our own tradition is inferior. I think that's where
Oh.
the problem is, right? Because then you have this
Yes, yes.
identity and culture that it seems like when people, or
Yeah.
not just people, but generally the system, before to use that word, tends to
Mm-hmm.
suggest that progress is moving away from anything that is African towards anything that is
Oh.
Eurocentric and European. So that is how we
Mm.
measure then progress. Whereas actually that's very
Mm-hmm.
problematic. What's supposed to
Right.
happen is, so you have this thing that is European, you have this thing that is where this one lacks, where this one lacks
Mm-hmm.
can be submitted or supported by this one
Mm-hmm.
somewhere. It does not
More
necessarily have to be the middle
complementary.
ground, but wherever they fit, the assumption is more complementary, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, because we live in a very more colonial, Western centric world,
Yeah.
we consistently have a situation whereby
Mm-hmm.
African identity is inferior,
I think when
right? It is not considered to be
I think when
important.
you also put it in that light, I'm reminded of what Docila you shared before when it came to expression of your hair,
Mm-hmm.
and you were you had a lot to say. You had a lot to say there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think just expressing, I think actually just speaking from my own experience as a Black woman and embracing all of that, we tend to end up being in those spaces whereby we don't know what being an African woman is. So we cling on what is easily available, and that is the vitenges, yeah, the couture, the attires, right? But when we look deep within ourselves and in our expressions, we find it very difficult to actually step into that identity and own it, and own your hair, own your Africanness, own your language,
Mhm.
own your body, because even how African women, men look is different. So,
I think for me, when you speak, when you
uh-huh.
touch on the language one, it
Mm-hmm.
kind of makes me feel very triggered because I remember, I mean, being born in Mombasa and moving to
Mm-hmm.
Nairobi, for example, and I revere the personally, I revere the Swahili language. I
Mm-hmm.
have long believed that it is the language of the future. It is
Mm.
such a rich language, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm in love with it nonetheless.
Mm-hmm.
And coming to the city and expressing myself eloquently in Kiswahili, I got a serious backlash. And I had, people looking at me funny and thinking I'm not as educated,
Yeah.
even wondering how did I get to the space that I was at that particular time.
Mm-hmm.
But then that informs how, that hybrid aspect or elements that Dikeledi you're saying, that people are not looking at English as complementary to
No.
Kiswahili,
Mm-mm.
but actually as superior.
True.
That, if we are speaking it, we must look up to the English, and the English is up there and the Swahili is down here.
Mm-hmm.
But
And you have to get it correct. Like you have to
yeah,
pronounce all the words correctly. You have to get the intonations correctly. And if you show up in your mother tongue, Swahili, whatever all those languages, as long as you speak, even when you speak English, it puts you at a certain place economically. People view you differently. So it's one of those things that I do believe it's an identity issue. We need to like go at the heart of it. And I think I had this quote whereby, if how do you expect to understand the world if you don't understand yourself?
yeah.
And you're not grounded in who you are. And I do believe, like, as African men and women, we cannot run away from our Africanicity
Mhm.
in the name of we want to catch up with the world. We'll get lost all the more.
I don't know, Dikeledi, the language aspect.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what can you say about that?
Yeah, I think it's similar to an experience that we've had in South Africa, and it seems like a common experience in many African contexts.
Mm-hmm.
A very sad one,
Mm-hmm.
actually. Where are devaluing our own languages. And remember, language is not just a mode of communication, but it carries our history, it carries our
Mm-hmm.
values, it literally carries our heritage as well, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to know about the history of the people, listen to what they say, listen to the words they use, how they use the words, etc. If you want to understand the identity, the cultural identity of a people, you look at the language as well. So I'll give you an example. So
Mm-hmm.
recently there's been this thing about, especially gender space, right? Gender and sexuality space, especially the concept of
Mm-hmm.
pronouns, right? So it's like, the West is
Mm-hmm.
coming
Yes.
Yeah.
now and saying, oh no, we don't want pronouns, etc. But we like, in African languages, binary pronouns were never there. Like really, we never had
Yeah.
binaries in terms of pronouns. So for instance,
Mm-hmm.
in
Oh.
my language, when you call a boy child or or a female child, male or female child, you use o guy, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
pronouns are the same. So there's no
Mm-hmm.
gender differentiation. There's no sexual differentiation in the
Mm.
language, and that also tells you so much about our history as well.
Wow.
Even with, for instance, because people have been wondering now, how, where African women before historically, were they always oppressed, etc. But now when people
Mm-hmm.
actually sort of
Mm-hmm.
linguists, when they study languages and they realize that
Mm-hmm.
hey, this is what a woman used to be called, or a woman, let's say for instance, a wife of a so-called chief, right? So the title
Mm-hmm.
that she had, that
Mm-hmm.
actually, for instance, with the Zulus in South Africa, right? Or so, for instance, this concept of Ndlovu or Ndlovukazi, right? And
Mm-hmm.
also you find it in the Botswanas as well, and as well. This Mufuma Hadi or again what is Mufuma Hadi. So this Hadi Kazi essentially sort of means
Mm-hmm.
something that edifies, right? So it literally something that is more relatively. So a chief and
Mm-hmm.
so a queen and a king. So in those indigenous languages, they actually tell you so much. Whereas, of course, when Europeans, when they came, they only recognized the males, right? And then they then, of
Mm-hmm.
course, then relegated them to chiefs and then certain political authority, with the
Mm-hmm.
exclusion of women, as if the women do not have political authority then. So, but when we look at our languages can actually no, women they actually held positions, right?
Mm-hmm.
They actually were esteemed,
Mm-hmm.
etc. So our languages carry so much, and of course, yes,
Yeah.
because of colonization, because of imperialism, by the way, cultural imperialism,
Ooh.
and that
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
continues up until today. That's what feeds notion. English is the most superior. All right. So people will say, oh no, you have to learn English because it's a global sort of business language. Of course,
Yeah.
there's no, I mean, we don't have a problem with learning English.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is when you now place it at a superior level in comparison to
Mm-hmm.
indigenous languages, right? Because English is also indigenous
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
in where
In
so
where it comes from.
when we do
Correct.
not exactly where it comes from, yes, it is very indigenous there.
Mm.
So
Mm-hmm.
if we do not value our own, and then we actually then think somebody who speaks English, they're more intelligent or more
Mm.
educated. I mean, really, that's very problematic, right? And I think
Yeah.
this is where the
Super.
state then comes in, right? So it's not just something that we can
Mm-hmm.
resolve at our own
Mm-mm.
state,
Mm-hmm.
our own government actually have to play a role in place value in our own languages, right? Particularly Kiswahili. And you're right.
Mm. Yeah.
Kiswahili is definitely a continental language. It is definitely a language. And I think it will only take African
Mm-hmm.
governments and African leaders to ensure that they do invest in Kiswahili,
Mm-hmm.
the language that we can use for
Mm-hmm.
commerce in the continent. So it
Mm.
can become a business language, right? And the lovely part about Kiswahili is that it's already advanced. It has literally, because I know in South Africa, the critique is, oh no, our indigenous languages, we still have to develop them to get to a particular level, which is great. We
Mm-hmm.
should work on that. But also we
Yeah.
should invest very much in Swahili, right? Because that
Mm-hmm.
becomes a continental language that enables us to communicate across the borders. And again, the state can do that. But if we have
Mm-hmm.
leaders who are very Eurocentric in their
Mm-hmm.
consciousness, then it's going to be a problem. Because
Yeah.
also they may assume, you know, or have this mentality that actually, no, 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 all that you need is English, and English is superior,
Yeah.
right? And people who speak English in a particular way may be treated better in comparison to somebody who not. And these are problems that unfortunately we do encounter on a daily basis.
I think when you
And
mentioned,
maybe just to say one last
yes,
thing.
yes, please go
I was
ahead.
saying just to mention one last thing about language and particularly in connection to dear, yes, when the idea of language and when I to the idea of commerce. So we see all of this is also going back to the economy as well, right? So not just the language, not it can. I mean, it can be languages of commerce and of course feeding into economic activity, right? So the economy of a country and of course the economy of a continent. So that also is taking us back to the conversation we had earlier, right? That language is also very much an economic factor, right?
Yes.
Because say now, for instance, if if you are existing in a country where English is privileged, do we think somebody from a remote part of Kenya would be able to confidently say, I'm going to host a podcast where I speak my own language? Because, you know, if I don't know English, that is not stopping me from engaging in, you know, this kind of work.
Yeah.
Oh, this is productive work, right? It is productive work. It is
Yeah.
contributing
It
to the
is.
economy, cultural, you know, communication sector, you know, all of that. So it is an economic
Uh-huh.
activity, what we're doing here. So if you're only privileging a specific language, then we are excluding other people from participating in the economy. But now
Yeah.
if we
I
say
think
your language
I
matter, your mother
I
matters,
think
and the
Dikeledi
space for
there.
it, we can actually, you know, utilize it for economic. Yes, ma'am.
I think you're hitting really hard, really, really hard. I am bleeding from the inside when you put it in context with what does to the economy. Because last week, I mean, Saba Saba, is like the World Swahili Day, right? And everybody's celebrating. And I just challenged myself. Let me walk to a local bookstore and look for Swahili literature,
Wow.
because in advancing this language, we must immerse intentionally. I mean, we can read, white authors, but also give room for Swahili authors as we continue to improve Swahili vocabulary. I walk into a very well-known bookstore, and I'm asking them, okay, if I want Swahili books, which section do I go to? Then this guy just tells me, for Swahili books, you must go to the education section. I'm like, what
At
do
the
you mean?
back.
Education. It's not even back. You're giving it a good look. It's just by the side, where all the primary school, high school, college books are. And I was shocked. I asked him again, are you sure? So who do you have in the general side of the store? Is like all the white authors, all of them. But for Kiswahili specifically, you must go to the education section. All right, I'm very pissed, and I still tell him, please make sure that we have the Swahili authors in the general section
Roadside,
as
yeah.
well. Because what you're telling me is that once I'm done with my education and learning from primary level to high school, that's the end of my Kiswahili journey. And even when I went to the education section, I was still asked, do you want books from the junior primary or high school level?
That's exhausting.
It is exhausting, and it just speaks to, even, if I am a young African woman who wants to write in Kiswahili, clearly already I'm being informed that this is not a very scalable, profitable venture. Because who reads me? It has to be in a school system. Whoever who reads about my stuff has to be within a formal school setup.
Yeah.
So what you're saying, Dikeledi, is quite upsetting, I must say. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate because that also creates avenues of exclusion. It creates and
Yeah.
sustains marginalization. And when we talk about justice, that's really not a way to address justice. All right. And I think the other thing, just to when we're now thinking about identity as an economic tool, or as an economic instrument, is as young people And I guess everybody who's concerned about unemployment, particularly that's affecting young
Mm-hmm.
people, we need to be mindful that unemployment also is partly a cultural issue. It's also
Mm.
an identity issue. And the
Oh.
reason I'm saying that is if if
Mm-hmm.
I am trading, I'm selling a product, and this product, I'm actually importing it from China. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe, we are talking about, let's say, whether it's a fake Louis Vuitton bag or a real one,
Mm-hmm.
right? Uh, and
I hear you.
Guys.
It's
and
a
I'm coming to
product nonetheless. It's a product nonetheless. Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
I'm importing it from wherever it's manufactured. I've actually also,
Mm-hmm.
what besides the fact that I'm feeding into cultural imperialism, I have also taken away the opportunity of job creation in Kenya. I've also taken away
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
opportunity for job creation in the continent. Because if we are not
Mm-hmm.
buying products that are made in our own part of the world, so it means literally the people and the workers who are supposed to be making those and being paid as a result, they're not getting that, right?
True.
So
Mm-hmm.
that also this takes us to the design that we privilege, right?
Mm-hmm.
So am I happy when I'm wearing Adidas? Am I
Mm.
happy wearing whatever a Western
Brands,
designer,
Nike.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
or do I see pride and class
Mm.
in wearing locally made, sort of wear, or even local designers? I'm pretty sure we have so many
Yeah.
now,
Amazing.
a lot of local African
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
designers, right? Pride in wearing their but now, and the sad part is, and I
Mm-hmm.
always, I really feel sad,
Yeah.
especially in the South African context, is have the state which gives money, right? It tends to fund a lot of
Mm.
artists, right? So they fund films,
Mm-hmm.
movies, and a number of things. So a lot of them you tend to see on Netflix. Some of them you would see at the end, they would say that right DTI as a funder,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And then in some of these much, and then you'd be like, okay, so this person, maybe there's this, maybe like a high class whatever person, a role that is given a person there, and what they'd be
Mm-hmm.
driving is a Mercedes Benz, and then the laptop that they'd be using is an Apple, and all of these things, and I'm like, do you really understand that by doing that you're
Mm-hmm.
actually marketing
Yeah.
foreign products to an African market?
Mm-hmm.
And you are not even being mindful that in Africa, there are certain car brands that you can actually say, okay, in the interest of the African Continental Free Trade Area. So let's bring whatever car
Mm-hmm.
that's made in Rwanda,
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
brand, for this as a
Mm-hmm.
prop for the particular movie,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then, oh, there's this cell phone that is made in South Africa, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be a prop that we're going to use in this movie.
Yeah.
If we as South Africa are not producing our own brands of cars,
Yo.
what we are not going to do is freely
Mm-hmm.
advertise the brand of other countries, and where those countries they're actually making more money out of them. Of course, in some instances, they can say, "Oh no,
Mm-hmm.
maybe there's an assembly line of
Mm-hmm.
company car in South Africa, which is creating
Mm-hmm.
jobs there." But nevertheless,
Mm-hmm.
it is not a South African brand,
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is something that we also need to be mindful of. So when we are watching movies, whoever is funding the movies, and even our celebrities as well,
Mm-hmm.
our celebrities, I mean, like being an influencer there, and then you're showing us your Louis Vuitton bag, like great. Are you an African? Like
Mm.
really, besides
Are you African and is
so really
Africa your
that
business? You know?
Mm-hmm.
exactly. Are you even maybe perhaps you're not, right? Maybe you are
Mm-hmm.
Eurocentric, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But do you love the country so much that you want
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that the product that you sell, it has people who can afford to buy it, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm a musician, I want to be bought by Kenyans. I want my music to
Mm.
be bought by South Africans. I want my music to be bought by Africans in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
literally that's, I mean, right? So my primary target, because that's most likely the place that I will boom at. So, but if I'm behaving in a way
Mm-hmm.
that, or I'm making economic decisions or financial decisions that are not going to make sure that there is work, in the spaces that I actually want a fan base in, so that I actually have a fan base that can afford to buy my music, right? So all of these things are interconnected. So these are the kind of decisions and choices that we need to be making, right? So
Yeah.
so as an
Yeah.
artist, as an influencer, an artist, whatever star or whatever it is, or anybody
Mm-hmm.
for that matter, and this also includes also all of us, ordinary
Yeah.
people
Mhm.
without fan bases, right? Um,
Mhm.
we need to make sure that we love our people so much, we love our continent so much that we actually are
Mm-hmm.
contributing to its betterment. And one of the ways to contribute to
Yeah.
it's literally embracing our own African identity. And African identity is not just about wearing
Mm-hmm.
kitenge only. Yeah, it's not just about having
Yes.
natural hair only. It is also
Mm-hmm.
decisions that we make consciously. All right. So when they
Mm.
say,
Mhm.
buy local, right? Buy African,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
so that's essentially how we are
Mm-hmm.
building the continent. That's essentially how we're
Yeah.
building our own
Mm-hmm.
countries. All right. And
And
like
I
I said,
think
I'm not saying
Dikeledi,
we should,
that's
everybody must. Yes,
that's like Dikeledi, that then becomes
yes,
like
yes,
a very intentional conscious,
Yes.
higher conscious, because you're not higher level of consciousness rather.
yes,
You're not just working out around your identity with a very linear focus,
Mm-hmm.
but you're able to see in this decision the reward is stems out this way. And it's not just I am wearing
yes.
whatever Eurocentric brand, and
Mm-hmm.
I am seen that I affiliate to Eurocentricity, and I am very modern. There's the element of modernity, but again, that I'm feeding other economies. I
Mm-hmm.
am not really empowering the local economies, and whatever situations we have going on economically
Mhm.
are not going to change anytime soon,
Mm-hmm.
because even the decisions I'm making around my identity are not informing
Yeah.
them.
True.
So it needs that level of consciousness, and not a very um self-centered. It's just about
Mm-hmm.
me, how I want to be seen, how I want to look. But how
Mm-hmm.
you want to be seen and how you want to look or identify informs of how your community as well is rewarded,
Mm-hmm.
financially, and as a collective, even how are Kenyans viewed. And I think I saw this
Mm-hmm.
funny thing online of how this guy was
Yeah.
saying that he thinks by now that all Kenyans, maybe I'm not Kenyan enough today, when they are born, they wear the flag wristband, that it has become a thing,
Yeah.
and everybody's wondering, is that a thing that inspires your confidence as a Kenyan, or what it is,
Oh, what
what
is
is it?
it?
But again, it just speaks to that you're okay and you're fine to
With.
affiliate and to be seen as such. And what
Mm-hmm.
does that mean? Pegging on what Dikeledi is saying, the
Mm-hmm.
people that make the speeds, you know,
Mm.
there's a whole economy there that has been
True.
empowered now,
Yeah.
that they are seeing that this is a national identity. And even those that are coming and are in the diaspora, they would still come home and they would want to purchase these things, and they'll purchase them from the local men, women, and young people, whoever who makes them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that. I really, really do love that. I have a question for you, Dikeledi. I don't know. Did you always grow up being this Afrocentric, or is it something that you tapped into perhaps as you grew up?
Yeah, it certainly is something that happened later on in life. So I was born into a hyper Christian family. My entire upbringing was within a church. So my
Mm-hmm.
parents met at a church, and
Hmm.
when I say literally born inside a church and grew up in a church, means from Friday, the church that I grew up in, starts on Saturday, ends on Sunday. So Friday, Saturday,
Wow.
Where?
Sunday, you're at church.
Wow.
During the week, then you're
Serious
yes. So
commitment.
essentially,
Mm-hmm.
and then of course also quite Eurocentric, right? In
Mm-hmm.
its leaning, the certain things that you're allowed to do that other Africans would practice, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But then now when the shift happened for me was when I was at university, and that shift began with my encounter with Pan Africanist and Black consciousness literature,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So when you began to read texts on so Black consciousness, the likes of Steve Biko, who talk about Black pride. So you read the work of Malcolm X, you read the work of Kwame
Mm-hmm.
Nkrumah. If we're shifting into the Pan African literature, so you had
Mm-hmm.
a
Mm-hmm.
whole lot of people who work made me
Mm-hmm.
realize that what I am is not it's not natural. It's something that was designed. But this particular
Oh.
design is not feeding my own African identity. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
what this designed identity that had been imposed upon me, and also systematically through other institutions, right? Through the schooling system, through the religious system, and many other ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what it was essentially was um, reinforcing this idea that being Black is inferior, that being
Mm-hmm.
Black is something that is bad, is something that you do not want, right? Being African is something inferior, etc. So, but that particular
Mm-hmm.
literature would say no, actually, right? So you need to be conscious,
Mm-hmm.
proud, be beautiful
Love
and
that.
Black, and all of these
Mm-hmm.
things. Then and that hair is also very much political, right? It's a very, very political
Mm-hmm.
instrument. So you say a lot with hair as well. So that's when I also started locking my hair. So I had, locks on my hair, and that, of course, then a number of other things then happened, and those other things then were more personal in a sense of trying to then learn about my own history, right?
Mm-hmm.
Learn about my own people. Remember, because the education that we were given,
Mm.
they would say, "Oh no, you were colonized," and colonizers,
Mm-hmm.
what they did, they gave your ancestors a mirror and you know and those types of narratives that actually really truly actions be like, I mean, how stupid can the people be that you only are given a mirror and then you give on land?
Mm-hmm.
You're like, and then when you read more, actually discover that that was not the case. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of resistance against colonization.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, colonization, its culture, whatever, it didn't permeate and affect everyone.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many other Africans who actually their own way of being, remains outside the influence of colonialism.
Mm-hmm.
That colonialism actually was its stronghold is the city. It is the urban area,
Mm-hmm.
right? So in a sense, that basically that challenging that we're an inferior people, that our ancestors were inferior, or whatever, became challenged by the literature I was reading,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then of course, so that's seeing like history that is over there, and then I started going into trying to understand who I actually am. So where do my ancestors come
Mm-hmm.
from? And then I actually then discovered that we come from royalty. Like
What?
Mm.
my great great great
Love
grandma,
that.
actually, right in Botswana,
Oh.
the royal house in Botswana,
Mm-hmm.
and then you also get to understand from paternal side as well. There's royalty there, and then
Mm-hmm.
you're like, all of these things that these people about us is not really true. Of course, not everybody was royal, but that does not necessarily mean or suggested that there's inferiority, even if you don't have royal blood, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then, of course, all of that for me was linked to also defying what Christianity was saying
Mm.
about my
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
ancestors, right? Because remember, Christianity tells you that your ancestors' culture and those people are demons,
Yeah.
right? So you literally, because they were not saved, so you really must just yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Too much truth.
So part of um, right, so part of challenging those notions that my ancestors were
Mm-hmm.
demons, and of course then that was also infused by then understanding that there had to be a demonization of my
Oof.
ancestors, or
Wow.
generally us as Africans, our own ancestors.
Wow.
Mm.
There had to be a demonization of our own spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
because our own spirituality goes against the economic modus operandi of the West.
Oof.
Correct.
I'm going to explain that.
Mm.
Go deeper,
So,
You
what
please.
it
better.
means. So,
Go deeper.
as an African spiritualist,
Mm-hmm.
right? If your child is sick, you're not going to go to a medical doctor whose entire value chain is to feed into a pharmaceutical industry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Uh, right. So I've had an entire capitalist pharmaceutical industry, right? Which, of course, where do the pharmaceutical companies come from? Where are they actually, situated?
Mm-hmm.
It's basically an import and from certain companies in, countries outside of the continent. Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
if
Mm-hmm.
my child is sick and I take him to a traditional healer who's a herbalist, and the traditional healer will
Mm-hmm.
say, okay, so this is what the situation is, and I get, okay, maybe there's this a lack of alignment in XYZ in the child's
Mm-hmm.
life. Maybe it also involves having to deal with whatever, maybe, a particular ritual that has not been practiced or has not been done by the family of this child. So now you have to then bring in the entire family of that,
Mm-hmm.
sort of the lineage of your paternal child. I mean, the paternal lineage of your child.
Mm-hmm.
So be mindful there. So you have this person trying to help resolve or keep together family unit together, right? Because to do a particular
Yeah.
ritual, it involves the aunties and the uncles, the grandmothers and the whoso of those people. So that sense of
Mm-hmm.
community will consistently be there. So
Yeah.
that the prescription is healing family institution. Number one.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, and then they would
Mm-hmm.
say, so here's a herb. Yeah. So there's a herbal mixture. Drink this
Mm-hmm.
day at this particular
Mm-hmm.
time, and then eventually this thing will go away. At what time did I get a
Mm-hmm.
prescription? At what time did I go and pay 450 or whatever, how much, a doctor costs?
Mm-hmm.
At what time did I go buy medicine,
Yeah.
and pills that are
Mm-hmm.
actually
Mm-hmm.
manufactured by some company outside of, South Africa, So in a sense, it is an entire economic value chain that's involved there. So therefore, if you're going to have people who believe, have a particular belief system that disrupts their utility
Mm-hmm.
of a medical system that is a capitalist mode of production, then you're not going to do it. You have to demonize. So you have to move those people away from that,
Mm-hmm.
because it's not just those beliefs about saving themselves and they get salvation eventually, at some point,
Yeah.
but it's then they also have to become the market for a particular, sort of medicinal industry. So in a sense,
Mm-hmm.
demonizing, our own ancestors, our own religions, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
is not just a cultural process.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much feeding into
Hmm.
an economic and financial sector.
What?
Wow.
Wow. I think I've continually answered myself,
Mm-hmm.
because my question was then, where does somebody start?
Yeah.
But then, not even but then, intentionality, consciousness is very key to this journey in discovering yourself and embracing yourself as an African.
Yeah.
Because if you only think of it one way, then you're lost. You're completely lost. It's not just in the feeling it gives you, in that gratification of affiliating to, a Eurocentric culture or whatever
Mm-hmm.
other culture.
Mm-hmm.
It's beyond that.
Yeah.
It's an entire systematic reward. Like, you're rewarding an entire system, you're rewarding an entire generation of generations, unknowingly, who continuously look down upon you. Like,
Indeed.
there is no day they'll wake up and even be grateful that, oh, we are grateful of the, Africans, and probably how much in their purchasing, or in their speaking about or showcasing our brands, they
Mm-hmm.
have enriched our communities. We will never get there, ever,
Yeah.
ever. So it's very important, for us to be very intentional and very conscious
Mm-hmm.
of the decisions that we are making in the quest of our African identity. Very, very important. That's
I,
what I'm getting from this.
I like what you're saying, Caroline, and I'm just thinking about where I gave that responsibility, like where I dropped it. And for me, I feel like I dropped it at my parents' feet,
Mm-hmm.
and only to realize that even them, they've been disconnected. Right. So
Mm.
it's a very intentional, personal journey to get on, because it seems like the disconnect is not just something, oh, my parents never taught me to embrace my Africanicity. Yeah, because even them, they are victims of this situation as is. And it's my personal responsibility to actually ask myself, so me as an African woman, what does that mean? And where can I get this information? And am I actually looking for that
And
information?
I think what you're saying about disconnect is important because more often than not, and particularly in the current scenario, when we talk about being disconnected from your roots, I think we've always labeled the younger generation. So it's quite enlightening for you to say you dropped it at your parents. Nobody
Yeah.
thinks that is how far it was dropped. Everyone thinks, oh, the current generation, look at how they're dressing, look at the music they're listening to, look. But the disconnect, it has roots
goes
during
back.
colonization, goes way back. So I
Yeah.
think it's very important that everybody, every generation has work to do.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know what you're taking away, Dikeledi, from
Yeah,
this
I think
conversation.
just yes, I think it also, remember when we said that colonization is a very violent phenomena, and
Mm-hmm.
it's something that we must not take for granted. Just there
Mm-hmm.
may not be a lot of movies that show how violent it was, and I think that violence, for a person to forget your own identity, which I'm really sure that every person loves and feels pride over who they are, and all of a sudden here's this, an imposed system and forces you to let go of your. I mean, there's no way that everybody willingly got, what's lost to the identity. So in some instances, how that happened would be through a reward system, right? So if you
Yeah.
Yeah.
remain, a heathen, or just a pagan, and you do not convert to Christianity, besides all of the, I mean, it happens up until today. I mean, look at how, as Muslims, as Christians, how we judge even today, people who actually do not subscribe to Christianity and Islam, right?
Yeah.
So imagine that, having to carry that weight of judgment, but also, converting also came with economic opportunities, right? It also came with all other sort of opportunities in terms of social infrastructure, right? Or access to social infrastructure. I'll give an example. So there's one text I read in the South African context, by this other author. I've forgotten his name. I'm so
No
sorry.
worries.
So he said, and he was writing in the context of what is happening in KwaZulu Natal in South Africa, right? How missionaries, right? So missionaries came and built schools and of course clinics as well. He would say, if you were, if you were someone who had not converted to Christianity, no matter how sick your child was, they would not allow
Yeah.
you to actually access medical
Interesting.
care. Do you understand?
Wow.
So of course, at that moment, if you see that your child is really dying, you are gonna say, "All praise to God, Jesus is Lord,"
Yes.
To
Yeah.
get
and
healing.
True.
and exactly, and so that your child actually gets some form of healing, right? And it was the same thing with job opportunities as well. So you dispossess people of their own economic independence, right, their own ability to self-sustain, and you create industries that destroy their own livelihoods. And when they now have to be dependent on you for work, you have certain terms and conditions for that particular work, you know so all of these things, including things like, for instance, the types of leaves that we have,
Yeah.
right? So I'll give you an example of one phenomenon that happened in South Africa. So you had this person, and this links up to religion. So in South Africa, when you pass away, right, a lot of the Black Africans, when a person passes away, the new culture is they're buried on the weekend, on Saturday or Sunday. So because during the week you have to be at work, yeah, because you literally are dependent on employment that has been given to you, right? Because a lot of people, again, historically, they were dispossessed, so there was a systematic creation of workers, right, who have to work for the system. And now when your loved ones pass away, you can't have a funeral during the week. It has to be on the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas historically in our cultures, that was never the case,
Mm.
right? So because of work, and now this also means if you are a Muslim working in South Africa, um, the likelihood of, if you're really if you don't have the level of independence to actually make your own decisions around when you bury your loved
Mm-hmm.
one, there's no way that you can bury your loved one a day after they literally have passed away.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to wait at a particular time. So, and it's not just that as well. Of course, there are a lot of Muslims who are able to bury their loved ones, the day
Yeah.
after. But now, when it comes to then, there's certain things that we call policies, or funeral policies in South Africa. Many of them, they pay out 2 or 3 days
Wow.
later. Do you see now? So it means if your own loved one and your own religion requires you to bury your loved one on a particular day,
Can
you can't
work.
do that, because now systematic.
Yeah.
Exactly, right? So all of these things are feeding into a particular culture, in sort of advancing a particular religion, of course, which is linked to culture,
Mm.
etc. So there's an institutionalization of privilege of certain things, and then of course the others also then suffer
Yeah.
Wow.
consequently. All right. So all of these things, again, so any form of, in as much as, yes, we can make those personal decisions to say, I'm gonna, live this Afrocentric
Mm-hmm.
life. Um, we cannot really discard the other institutional and systematic
Mm.
influences on these activities that we wish to live
Yeah.
I'm
by. All
almost
right,
feeling
because
like our hands are tied.
That's the
Whichever
feeling.
way we turn, Dikeledi,
Ooh.
as you share
Mm.
that,
Mm.
But I must say, we must be hopeful, because even for us to have this conversation today, it
Yeah.
means something. Yeah.
Mm.
So maybe,
yes.
maybe some room for a parting shot. For those who are watching, for those who are listening, what anything you have to tell them around this quest for Afrocentricity?
Embracing your own identity, one, besides the fact that it will instill a sense of pride in who you are, it will be also a source of healing,
Mm.
right? And as you had mentioned earlier, you spoke about healing, sort of, generations, or the dividends for generations to
Mm.
come. So it's about healing the
Mm-hmm.
past, right? Healing what our parents, our grandparents have gone through that we may not necessarily know what led to their own loss of
Yeah.
identity, but also healing ourselves, and also for the purpose of healing the future as
Mm.
well. So when we embrace who we are, that's essentially what we're
Wow.
doing,
Mm.
right? A deep form of
Mm.
healing the past, today, for the
Wow.
Wow.
future. All right. And of course, the nobody can take away what pride, what pride does for a person's sense of
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
self, what pride does for a person's self of
Mm.
confidence, and all of that. And then the last thing is that we must never forget that identity is very much an economic
Yeah.
tool.
Wow.
All right.
That's very
So if we
profound.
seek to fix our countries, if we seek to fix our continent, let us embrace our own
Wow.
identity.
I
Wow.
don't know what you can say to Seal after that, really.
I First of all, I feel like a fire has been ignited. Yeah. And definitely I love that I'm learning that identity is not just who I choose to be today. You
Mm-hmm.
know, identity is linked to a growing economy or a losing economy.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to be an active participant in those decisions by how I choose to identify myself and
Mm-hmm.
to know who am I empowering by choosing who I choose to identify as.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's something that I'm actually taking. Yeah, to actually ponder on that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
hear you. And for you who is watching, listening to us, it's a quest, as we said. It's a
Mm-hmm.
journey, it's fluidity, but it's a journey worth taking, because you literally are the person who has the power.
Mm-hmm.
If this identity of our Africanness, our ethnicity has to move from this generation to the next, has to be sustained. It has to be sustained in all fronts, has to be sustained in our culture, in our heritage, in our economies, in everything that we exist in within.
Yeah.
So please go out there, or go in there because we also had he has to start from India
Yeah.
and start this quest. It's a journey worth taking. Thank you very much, Dikeledi, for joining us today. Thank you, Dosila, for the insights as well. This has been mind blowing.
Yes.
Yeah, if you have any questions, anything you want us to have conversations around, you can just follow us, share with us anything you have in our comment section, and we will definitely see where we can squeeze it or give it more prominence. Thank you so much. We hope the conversation was engaging and enriching, and it's keeping you moving.
Yay.
Bye.
Bye. See you in the next one.